Are you a rational heathen? I think the true question here is if you were already a rational person before any beliefs, any inclinations, or any sort of mindset or worldview. Hello my dear friends, how are you? How have you been? I'm Arith, and today I'm going to talk about rationality in heathenry, or paganism in general for that matter, especially when it comes to modern day constructions and reconstructions of pagan beliefs, which unfortunately have been highly twisted to look like something that wasn't originally, just to fit into modern political perceptions and obsolete worldviews that do nothing but creating a stagnating point and preventing people from evolving spiritually. So, before we become anything in our life, perhaps the very first thing we should try to be is being rational. Rationality is a defensive mechanism that will surely help us to filter the amount of lies and wrongness throughout the process of living. There's no point in trying to avoid this and that, because while we are alive, it is inevitable to come across several ideas and perspectives and perceptions, and naturally we are influenced by a variety of things. But a mind without the capacity of being rational is a mind like a sponge, and will soak every little bit of information. And if we aren't able to filter information, we will end up stuck in a perception of the world that simply becomes familiar and comfortable because we grew up with it and it's been with us for so long, and then we simply have a fervent aversion towards what is new and different, because that means change. It means getting out of the mental bubble we have so carefully constructed by picking up what is most appealing and completely leaving aside what is slightly inconvenient. And therefore, we do not evolve if we stick to the same mindset. And a great problem with this as well is that the fact that we become vulnerable to every little bit of information that sounds appealing and creates a sense of comfort and protection, and we feel safe. But that sense of safety and comfort is no more than an illusion created precisely by those who know perfectly well what are our fears. And so they play with such fears and give us information according to those same fears and feed us illusions of right and wrong. And in that moment, we become the product of someone else's political campaign. We become vulnerable, instead of being the product of our own rationality and the simple process of thinking for ourselves. You will better understand this shortly, what I'm saying throughout this video. So let's get started, please. Today I'm going to talk about the importance of being a rational heathen, but I'm specifically picking heathenry because, well, every new age idea and religious construction and reconstruction based on Germanic paganism perfectly illustrates several problems I'm going to talk about and will help me to pass on the message. But rest assured that what shall be spoken in this video can easily be applied to everything else in life. But well, I'm a heathen, a pagan, if we want to distribute labels as if there was some sort of promotion. And I would very much like to prevent further political corruption, not just in heathenry, but paganism and spirituality as a whole. Hard work, I know, and difficult, but not impossible. Very well. When it comes to pagan spiritualities, we have all been in the same situation, I think, at one point in our lives, trying to find information to get started, trying to understand what exactly is paganism, where to start, to whom we should turn to, some concrete information to give a step forward and begin our journey. When it comes to heathenry, Germanic paganism, Nordic or Norse paganism, whatever, we find some books at first that gave us a sort of perspective on Norse paganism, but highly from the point of view of that specific author, or a romanticized idea, not at all academic, purely fantasy, with a hint from other neo-pagan religions and even a mixture of exotic and trendy religions that are not in the three main monotheisms. And then we eventually develop our process of learning about paganism in general, but already with a heavy baggage of absolute crap. But that's the way things are. We have to start from somewhere, right? The problem here is when the years go by and we remain stuck to the same simple and the first impressions we had of paganism. That's the true problem when we think that the information we have gathered is enough. Surely, it can be a great amount of information, a great amount of knowledge, but it's never ever enough. This is the point when we start to bring some rationality into paganism. Because after all, it's not just becoming a pagan and have a label and that's it, it's done. I think the true journey here is to completely change our previous mindset and construct a new one so we can evolve. And you cannot become something different if you transport the same old and obsolete mindset into this new version of yourself you are striving to create. Because if your new mindset is still based on previous beliefs, nothing is new after all, and you are just covering your same old self with an exotic blanket, but the inside remains absolutely and the same. So the knowledge you have gathered isn't enough and will never be enough, because I think the objective isn't to become and to remain what you have strived to become, but the objective is evolution and always striving to be a better version than your previous self, your past self. And on you go, always moving forward. So the more we study about paganism, obviously, the more we know. And we become familiar with a variety of things, especially the methods and sources that have been used for the constructions and reconstructions of paganism. And that's important. So when it comes to heathenry, many are those who stick with the very first sources they got their hands on. They are immediately, more often than not, introduced to the Prose Edda, to the Ovamal, maybe even a few Old Norse poetry collated into the famous Poetic Edda. And these sources are good sources, but they become the new Bible for some people, taken quite literally. And at times they even become the strict guidelines of an entire new spirituality. But if we are rational, we understand perfectly well what is going on, and that modern-day heathen religious constructions and reconstructions are no more than that exactly. Modern constructions and reconstructions created by people who were unable to truly evolve and leave their previous mindset behind. And then they got stuck in that point because they thought they were better than anyone else by having a few notions of the pagan past and no longer belonging to the group of blind followers of the previous religions these people have been in. But because they were unable to move past their previous religious ideas, they transport those same religious ideas and perceptions into their new religious creation. And many modern-day neo-paganisms are simply and nothing more than paganizations of the three main monotheisms. We do have a great consideration over the sources to try to find some sort of hidden holy book and have something to hold on to. But the truth is, very little of the actual pagan beliefs of the Germanic past were actually recorded, very little indeed, and the fragments of information we have are from specific periods in time, from specific cultural ideas of a moment in history, and well, not to mention that the information in those sources are also perspectives of specific geographical realities as well, and that other people in several other points, other geographical realities, worshipped different aspects of the divine and the spiritual. In pre-Christian Scandinavia, not everyone worshipped the same. One thing are the great urban centers and centers of power. Another, completely different thing, are all the social realities of that culture living in remote areas, for instance, or in border areas, and not to mention the great amount of cultural syncretism that never stopped. In pre-Christian Scandinavia, there wasn't a specific religion. There was no name for it, no specific institution or structured priesthood governing the religious sphere and recording everything. Like I said, not everyone worshipped the same. Besides, there is also a big difference between religion and mythology. They are not the same. Many gods appearing in Old Norse sources written after, in great part after Catholicism became the official religion of Scandinavian countries, were never actual gods that were actually worshipped in the pagan past. Many are, and many are not. In fact, the sources give us a lot more information of characters that were never worshipped or never seen as gods, and just bits of information concerning actual gods actually worshipped in pre-Christian Scandinavia. And that is understandable, because when such sources were created, the people that composed such sources had already been culturally, geographically, and temporal distanced from the pagan past. So we get pieces of information, and if we get stuck to that, we shall never evolve. We can know a lot about pre-Christian pagan beliefs if we look for it, and the evidences are there, and archaeology still gives us a lot of clues. More than the usual prose Edda. For instance, the prose Edda that some heathens are so fond of and take it as their holy pagan Bible. We do have to be rational and study the sources with a critical mind, aware that what has been written isn't the totality of belief, and it isn't a collective pagan mentality shared by every individual from this specific culture in the past. Like I said, in pre-Christian Scandinavia, not everyone worshipped the exact same thing. There was a lot of different perceptions. It was very diverse. Now, this is the true beauty of paganism. Let's call it folk beliefs. The true beauty is its extreme diversity and how fluent those beliefs are, how they are able to fit in every age of human history, how they can be adapted to new ways of life. Paganism as a whole is meant to evolve, I think, because the human mind is always evolving and adapting to new realities in order to survive. And if spirituality isn't capable of accompanying the process of evolution of the human mind, it will be rapidly turned into something useless and obsolete and forgotten. And the human mind without a sense of mystery and magic, without a sense of spiritual purpose, is a mind that is not fully immersed into the beauty of existence itself. Paganism evolves with humanity because it's deeply rooted in our beings. It is our way to put into words and into action our spiritual connection and symbiotic relationship with the spiritual reality, which is all around. This is the same thing within heathenry, which is a spirituality that has always been diverse, with many variants, many conceptions from village to village and always changing from town to town, from region to region, and of course, obviously, from generation to generation, in constant evolution, always. The rational mind understands this, and because of being rational, it will understand that the New Age pagan religious constructions are often in constant denial and prevent spiritual evolution, especially when we find out that most groups, communities, and religious organizations are fervent believers of the 19th century nationalist romanticism, in which the mythology and the beautiful folk beliefs of the past were molded, twisted, shaped and reshaped for nothing more than political ends. In a time when actual knowledge of the pagan past was something close to nothing, and what was in fact created was a new Christianization of the pagan past to fit into the 19th century nationalist political tendencies of the time, not actually seeking the spiritual and striving to bring back paganism, but seeking proof in the past that could justify nationalist political ideas, nothing more. And that proof wasn't actually found, but was concocted. And as such, we end up with many modern-day religious reconstructionisms that have invented and borrowed elements to fill in the gaps, creating gods that never were, creating notions that were never real, creating celebrations that were never ever celebrated. And even more dangerous, I think, transporting the contemporary mentality into the past, as if what was understood to be good and evil, right and wrong in the 19th century was the exact same thing 1,000 years ago. Even social realities of the present transported into the past. There's a great component of mystery in pagan beliefs, and it isn't different in heathenry. There's a great deal of magic and magical performances. The very act of worshipping is already a form of magic. And magic being a natural impulse in every human, as being a form to communicate and being in direct contact with the spiritual sphere that surrounds all of us. Magic and mystery is the natural human action to create a link between the unseen realities. Even so, in heathenry, there are a great deal of groups and communities, even religious organizations, especially religious organizations, that have a very narrow self-conception of reality and are unable to open up their horizons to what lies beyond. There's still fear in the unknown, of the unknown. There's still the sense of denial of magic because it's strange and abnormal, something out there in the gloom, in the dark places of the wild, and we must be here stuck inside our new little temples that we have just built to be protected under the watching eyes of the gods. But such New Age pagan religious organizations forget that the divine is out there. The spiritual is all around, and not in figurines or in houses to harbor man-made statues of beautiful gods created in our own image. That is not heathenry, I think. That is not paganism. To be stuck indoors with shallow, empty and cold figures of the divine. And I understand the need to feel safe and wanted and be comfortable. Be indoors within a temple and look at the faces of the gods and be at peace. But all of that is very beautiful, but it's not freedom. It's not spiritual freedom. Spirituality isn't comfortable. It is chaos and madness, and everything is upside down and upwards and downwards, all at the same time. Freedom isn't safety and comfort. Freedom is curiosity, And it is the willingness to know and set out to find that knowledge and come back wiser. And with such wisdom, we can then create safety and comfort. Now, why should we not seek the mysterious and the magical if it naturally runs through our very spirit? And that's when diversity comes in. The diversity and multiplicity of beliefs and perceptions and conceptions of the spiritual reality. Some people fight so fervently to maintain heathenry pure as if it had ever been pure. This purity is an illusion created by the 19th century and early 20th century nationalist ideas, that everything had to be pure and original, stuck and confined to that one self-notion of order. Heathenry was never pure in any aspect, especially in beliefs, as it has always been about cultural exchanges, cultural syncretism, and what best calls to us. It was never about what one man thinks it's right. It has always been about seeking the unseen, the mysterious, the magical, the spiritual, by whatever is speaking to us, and through whatever means necessary to seek out and be in contact with the mysterious forces of the world. This sense of maintaining heathenry pure is a restriction, actually, that prohibits the spiritual person from exploring the magical. This notion of being true to the gods and pray to them is nothing but being false to ourselves. Why should we fear the gods? If the gods are real, shouldn't we strive to find them and be in contact with them? If we fear them, then we build temples, get a few figures of the gods inside and pray to them. It's safer that way, while everything else is happening outside and we are missing it. While we spend days in darkness, in the darkness of our own mental temples, the sun is shining out there. And the true beauty of the spiritual is happening all at once, at every moment. Paganism, heathenry as well, is something wild that fervently stirs within us, calling to us. It's inspiration and creativity, it is passion, it is life and death, it is the beauty of existence. And it should be something that helps us to find that beauty of existence and the beauty of the spiritual and know it. When certain religious organizations strive to build a pure identity, they confine people to a narrow self-conception of something that is nothing more than a personal illusion or a twisted dream, and completely cut people from mystery. There is much denial still within paganism, especially within heathenry, a denial of the truth, a denial of diversity, a denial of freedom, denial of the spiritual itself, because some religious organizations only want to bind people to their will and keep them in the dark, keep them in ignorance, so they can better control them, mold them and reshape them and twist them and use their fear to impose their own ideas, just as they have corrupted the beauty of paganism for their own political propaganda. They use religion as a wall between us and the spiritual, instead as a door into the unknown and the mysterious. Being rational is perceiving the close-minded aspects within such New Age pagan religious organizations. It's utterly tragic when people are forced to follow an illusion of spirituality by being grounded to their own limited perceptions of mortality. Because when they seek the spiritual, they will only find the religious first. And they want to belong, want to feel welcomed and have comfort and being safe. But all that safety and comfort doesn't come without a price. And the price is freedom. Freedom being taken away, the freedom to choose whatever gods they want, in whichever way they want, in whatever culture they want. And not because a handful of close-minded people want to maintain their religion pure and end up cutting themselves and cutting everyone else from the true beauty of the divine, the beauty of the magical and the mysterious and the spiritual that lies within the spiritual concepts they have enclosed in their pure religion and allow no one to get closer. It's funny, yet terrible, or at the very least ironic, when Christianity, for instance, in its historical existence has been filled with horrors of imperialism, inquisitions, witch hunts, patriarchy, racism, xenophobia, chauvinism, abuse in general, and all of this highly destructive and oppressive system creates such hatred in people that the only way to escape such agonizing emotions is to project them by demonizing everything that doesn't fit into this worldview and as such perpetuate intolerance. And what is truly ironical is that many modern day pagans, especially and unfortunately modern heathens, often share this worldview and continue the oppressive method of even trying to control the spiritual, trying to control what others should or should not think and should or should not believe. Why? Because they lack rationality and were not yet able to understand that their pagan views, their heathen groups and communities, religious organizations, were not yet able to evolve and move past the obsolete ideas of the previous religions they have been at, or because they cling to the same nationalist romantic fantasies that simply do not serve any purpose but to perpetuate hatred. Such people are simply the product of the ignorance of those who call themselves priests and priestesses of the New Age religions, that pass on to those people their own ignorance and perpetuate ignorance in the name of nothing but a false sense of purity of the spiritual. But they forget that the spiritual isn't one's own perception of the world, but in fact a never-ending spiritual reality, constantly on the move, constantly changing and evolving. And as such, the spiritual isn't always the same, and it doesn't manifest itself specifically as that one person thinks it should be. The spiritual manifests itself in as many different ways as there are eyes to perceive it. Modern heathenry in many religious organizations is nothing more than a projection of an idealized, never-existing pagan past, excluding everything that does not belong, does not fit into this narrow and shallow self-identity. It's superficial, simple, and fragile. And for instance, projecting all sorts of Jehovah-like qualities onto Odin and a great involvement and focus revolving around the figure of Odin, as if it were their savior, the Almighty God. And yes, indeed, he became known as the All-Father. And another example, Loki becomes some sort of Christian-like also through Satan or devil. The myths are taken too literally, which is a sign of ignorance, not only because the written sources are the product of a specific period and neither reflect the totality of beliefs nor the actual religious mind, but also because such written sources are also the product of the mind that created them, and therefore, in great part, are the conceptions and personal interpretations of some loose notions that have been altered time and time again. These notions completely turn off the sense of magic and mystery. And speaking of Odin, it's a sad joke to turn the very god that seeks knowledge and mystery, that seeks spiritual freedom and acts solely to test his own limits, turning this very chaotic figure into an orderly aspect of a creator and protective deity. It begs the question, Are these people really heathen, or are they unconscious Christians who are the product of the illusions created by the very organizations they are in, that do not work to achieve spirituality but to bring political ideologies into the religious? They seem to have been unable to escape the obsession of belief and worship and being true to the gods. For goodness sake, the very term to describe some branches of neo-pagan religious manifestations is called Ausotheru, which started to be designated as the faith of the gods, and then to be true to the gods, as if the actual pagans of the past were that faithful and fearful of their own gods. They had little time to spend in prayers and worshipping, and to conduct their lives by the 9 noble virtues, which is just a modern creation to create some guidelines to replace the 7 sins. In archaeology, when dealing with paganism, including obviously pre-Christian Scandinavian pagan beliefs, it's almost impossible to distinguish between what is magic and what is religion, because in the past the worshipping of the gods was done in every single daily task. To be alive and have action was already a constant interaction with the spiritual, because the spiritual was understood to be everywhere, in every single thing, every movement, every action, every breath taken, because the spiritual was all around. And there was this constant symbiotic relationship with the spiritual. It was never about worshipping, actually. It was about action, to have the right action, to perform and to do, to be active. It was a constant life within the mysterious and the magical. There was no fear of the gods per se. There was only being alive and try to do the right action, to create a balance as much as possible with the spiritual surroundings. Try to live in harmony in that place of existence, because the gods weren't in some distant place in the sky. The divine was in every blade of grass, every tree, and every rock. The world of the pagans was teeming with spirits, land Vaethir, as you know, wights, trolls, elves, dwarves, fairy-like beings. The ancient pagan mind was a construction built out of curiosity, if nothing else. The world was filled with mystery and magic, and the natural, curious mind of man seeks out to understand the meaning of things. The pagan mind had little time to spend in prayer and confined within temples and being faithful and true to the gods, and to a mortal identity dictated by some narrow self-conception of the being. Pagans knew they were as much spiritual creatures as everything else around them, and as such they were curious and wanted to interact with the unknown. They were not reluctant in accepting diversity. On the contrary, there was so much cultural syncretism, and quite evident in both the written sources and archaeological findings, that we clearly see there was the acceptance of a diversity of beliefs, because the spiritual itself was diverse, and man was inserted in this spiritual diversity. They were part of it, not excluded in some narrow-minded sense of purity and wanting to be locked away in that purity, away from everything else, away from knowledge. We won't find the gods within the conceptions of the divine of a religious organization that wants to be stuck in an illusionary construction of the past that fits into specific political modern ideas. The gods won't come to you because you are special or faithful, because you remain true and pure. The gods are not to be waited on. The divine and the spiritual in general is to be discovered, to be sought. Curiosity is the key to open up all doors of knowledge. And only a rational mind is capable of understanding that, what that truly means. The rational mind has been trained to distinguish between methods and actions of control from what truly sets the mind free. And it's truly easy, I think, to see that. For instance, when you understand that certain religious organizations will accept or reject people solely based on trivial things of the physical reality, such as skin color, and then you know they are not about spirituality at all, but a personal political agenda, and yet again, the sacred marriage between religion and politics, to form a group of followers to back up their claims, and so they can feel safe and comfortable in their own lies. And their followers will fight for them, because after all, such followers are the product of the lies that have been told to them, and lies that soothe their fears. And such fears are the product of ignorance. Such religions play with ignorance and turn it to their advantage. And it's so profitable when they have blind followers purely controlled by an illusion of fear that could very well end if only they sought the truth. I'm sorry, but let's be clear, rejection based on race is a sad reality and unfortunately still going. Religious organizations like this do nothing but wave hands and point fingers, accusing others of not being true heathens solely because they are of the wrong skin shade. It's truly pathetic to think that a certain group of divine entities belongs to a single race of mortals. That is truly a self-centered, narrow perception, being fully egocentric. No one holds the divine. You cannot simply say that this is my God and you can't touch it because my God is black, white, blue, green, and you don't have this skin color, so you cannot have it. It's even stupid and very simple-minded to assume that the divine has any allegiance to a specific group of mortals. The divine belongs to the spiritual, and the spiritual belongs to nothing but itself. And we are in it, all in it. And nothing is better or worse than anything. The gods do as they please, and they behave as they must, and not as we want them to behave. And they are not what we want them to be. There is still this sense of wanting to control the spiritual mind itself and reduce the God to specific physical conceptions that fit into one single egocentric consciousness. What gives us the right to assume what the divine wants, and what it thinks, and what it does and doesn't, and what is right and wrong? Leave that for those religions whose people think that their God serves them for being faithful and pure and for not committing any sin and getting on their knees. The spiritual also lies within the human mind, and the human mind is as free as we let it be. If we are rational, we avoid being influenced by the first idea that comes out of someone who claims to know the will of the gods. Even though the Old Norse sources do not fully represent the actual pagan past and folk belief of the ancient Nordic heathens, we can still see in the early sources some reflection of the pagan past. And we can also find it in archaeology and folklore and other non-Scandinavian written sources. The problem here isn't strictly the sources, but how modern-day heathens interpret them. When the sources are interpreted to fit into political notions, or when links are created between things that originally had no connection whatsoever. This is also a big problem in modern heathenry. The fact that certain groups and religious organizations are fervent deniers of academic work and the study of several sources, and the study of comparative mythologies as well. Many of these organizations rely on personal gnosis, and what they preach is simply their own notions clouded by the modern reality they live in. Knowledge is meant to flow and to be shared and compared, exchanged, analyzed, and to be criticized. Like I said, some modern heathens are yet to reach the point of letting go this psychological obsession with belief as if nothing else truly matters, and abandon all sense of rationality and take the sources too literally and see the gods exactly as they have been described, as they have been portrayed in not at all coherent written ideas. There's still this idea of a Germanic religion, Norse religion, heathen religion. There wasn't a religion in pre-Christian Scandinavian pagan past. There wasn't, like I said, there wasn't a religious institution. People were not worshipping the exact same thing, following the words in some book uttered by a religious figure. We deal here with the term religion in a very individualistic sense, as a conception of something that includes an authority, strict canons to be followed, rules, religious laws, rituals, and the centrality on dogmas or beliefs. We still have this sense that pagan beliefs of pre-Christian Scandinavia are something that has continuously been happening for a very long time without changes and very constant, which just isn't true. But that notion is only created by the need to maintain it pure in an attempt to protect a strong and unchanging tradition, as if anyone could come and corrupt it. And this only happens because there is a denial of the reality. And as I said, these pagan beliefs were never constant, and there was a lot of cultural syncretism already in the past, and it never stopped, and continued to change, to evolve and to adapt. That's with all religions and with everything all around us. It's constantly changing. Nothing is truly pure. Pre-Christian pagan beliefs of a Germanic past are very clear that they have been hardly a demanding faith with stern requirements from those who practiced it. The celebrations, rituals, festivities were there and existed, but were only there for those who had the desire to be part of it. People were manifesting their beliefs in a variety of ways. Like I said, not everyone worshipped the exact same thing. And that is also applied to religious performances and rituals. Not everyone was doing the same rituals and the same manifestations of faith. No one was trying to convert anyone to their Germanic pagan beliefs. The funny thing is that in the Germanic pagan past, there was no hostility towards other forms of belief and practice. In this religious way, our ancestors were way smarter than us. Why are some modern heathens behaving as if their religious views were the true ones and only ones, and people must be part of it or else be shunned, rejected, and ignored? Some modern heathens so proudly say they follow the religion of their ancestors, and then they behave exactly in the opposite way, and they have learned nothing from the process of jumping from their previous monotheistic ideas into this new pagan lifestyle. And why is that? Because more often than not, people become pagan because they are running away from something, and not because they have the desire to evolve and become better. Ancient heathens were not vigorously seeking to convert people, and they did not took advantage of minorities or people with different religious beliefs and perspectives. They were the first to want to adopt new ideas, innovation, always ready to evolve And this is one of the reasons why eventually the Romans were so successful in Germanic territory, and why Germanic peoples adopted several cultural aspects from the Romans, including religion, a lot of religious conceptions actually. And there was a great sense of fairness as well. Heathens at one point lived comfortably alongside Christian neighbors, and we have evidences of this specifically and especially in Denmark that remained for a couple of centuries without bothering themselves with the growth of Christianity. And in the Scandinavian peninsula, this was also true. Viking traders brought Christianity into Scandinavia. Some have adopted Christianity, others were Christian and pagan, both at the same time, adopting Christ as yet another god in their pantheon. Now, the problems began when Christianity started to be forced upon the people, because until that moment, within the Germanic cultural world, everyone was free to choose whatever they wanted to worship, because it wasn't a question of belief, but a question of practice and how best to reach harmony and balance. Please read this note below. So, when Christianity started to be forced upon the people, breaking away the balance, breaking away fairness, and everything started to be replaced by intolerance, then, yes, there was a big problem, and the soils were soaked with blood, because ignorance is the cause of most suffering. So yes, Christianity became a problem among the ancient heathens when the church gained the support of the ruling powers, the elite, and finally revealed its true colors, revealed their fundamental intolerance for other faiths and for other people, specifically for minorities. Then came the pagan resistance against it, but unfortunately it was already too late, because racism, misogyny, xenophobia, intolerance in general had already settled in. And this terrible Christian worldview heathens of the past have suffered from is now again taking root within modern heathenry itself. Many modern heathens, and especially religious organizations, are committing the same mistake their supposed ancestors have suffered from, and perpetuating everything that was wrong and what almost destroyed heathenry in the first place. These people so proudly say they are guided by their ancestors. Well, they are not, clearly. Otherwise, they would not become the very spitting image of those who tried to destroy their beloved faith in the past. It's both ridiculous and ironic when certain heathens want to make heathenry pure by being intolerant, and then they are the ones destroying it from within, precisely with their intolerance, their hatred, which instead of being something attractive so more people might come and enjoy it, it becomes the exact opposite, and people fear it, move away, forget about it, and reject it. And when only a handful of people remaining in that illusionary religious purity finally die, their religion dies with them and all is lost again. As I said, more often than not, people become pagan because they are running away from something, and not because they have the desire to evolve and become better. And then they transport the same previous obsolete and highly intolerant religious views into their new path that doesn't become anything new actually, but just more of the same, but with a pretty cover. But inside its roots, its very core, it's still rotten. When you run away from something, you will continue to find it everywhere you go, unless you change your mind, of course. Becoming a pagan isn't about running away. It's about moving forward and go towards evolution and strive to become a better version than our previous selves, our past selves. Paganism of the past, especially Germanic paganism, wasn't about rejection of those who do not want to participate or are not from that skin color or that specific physical aspect or with that specific belief. Those pagan folk beliefs were a form of providing a framework holding the community together by regular feasts, by involvement, by being part of it, giving the sense of belonging and not rejection to maintain something pure that was never pure to begin with due to thousands and thousands of years of cultural syncretism. It's very dangerous to live in a limbo of our personal lunacy and fanaticism and drag others into it. That's how cults start and evolve into a group, a community, then into an organization, and finally a religion that was already rotten in the beginning. Many modern-day neo-pagan religions have become fervent protectors of their belief system, which is nothing more than convictions that are held without regard to evidences. Often belief systems on the opposite side of logic and rationality. Beliefs that are expected to be accepted without any foundation, without any question asked, without any evidences demonstrating the contrary or supporting it. And when someone comes and starts to ask too many questions, starts to show doubt, starts to show rationality and the need to question in order to understand naturally, such people are immediately put aside, ignored and rejected. Such religious organizations call the followers of other religions as sheep, but they too become sheep when they are expected to follow and believe without question. Rationality belongs to the realm of logic, and it truly is a useful mechanism to protect ourselves, because sometimes belief is the result of a well-structured argument, with some evidences actually, and it seems all right and true. But the argument can very well be a carefully studied construction to bind people into accepting and agreeing with that belief. And if we do not train our rational mind, it will be very hard to evaluate the veracity of the arguments or the carefully chosen truths. The 19th century was filled with well-spoken scholars who have created much of the basis for our modern neo-pagan religions such as Wicca and Asatru, for instance, which in great part still cling to that same past, and well-structured arguments that simply aren't true. But they sound true, and fit well, and make sense, but are simply sweet and romantic lies. So be attentive. I know what some of you might think, that rationality has no place in spirituality because rationality kills belief. Precisely. Belief is the poison of all religions. Blindly believing without questioning and follow that belief moving forward without looking around and ending up falling into a hole in the ground. The rational mind, the logical mind, is often rejected or dismissed and presumed to be incapable of having a spiritual experience. On the contrary, actually, the spiritual isn't a case of belief. The spiritual is a case of knowing. And the more rational we are, the better it is to filter out everything that prevents us, that truly prevents us from reaching the actual spiritual experience. Ignorance is the cause of most suffering. So be rational for your sake and everyone's sake. Rationality isn't a boundary separating us from the spiritual. On the contrary, rationality protects us from being damaged by our own natural curiosity, and as such we become ready and more receptive, open-minded and sensitive to the experiences we receive by the gathered knowledge. Because if you are not aware of what you experience, you don't know how to distinguish the genuine spiritual experience from the natural impulse your brain has in creating its own illusions based on your desires. So it's not just in heathenry, but in paganism in general, in spirituality as a whole, that rationality is greatly needed, a rational mind. So we may grow and evolve, finally emerge from darkness to reach great wisdom and finally enlightenment. We need to grow out from religious fundamentalism, which is nothing more than a method to destroy spiritual freedom. Stop fighting against education. Stop fighting against knowledge and those who are eager to exchange knowledge with you. The real fight is against ignorance. Alright, my dear friends, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, tack för det.